All right, so we are going to look at the 1950s. For your textbook, this is The Triumph of the Middle Class. So here we go. Some of the big ideas that we're going to be looking at is understanding the factors explaining the rise of prosperity. So what brought that all on? Assessing the changing roles of cities and suburbs, evaluating the ways that the 50s were kind of a historical norm, but not a real norm. All right, and then analyzing women, youth, families, and the changes happening inside of there. All right, so economically speaking, remember the Cold War, right? We have containment, we had the Truman Doctrine, then we had the Marshall Plan, and then we had the Eisenhower Doctrine. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have the World Bank, okay? And what we're going to start off with is the Bretton Woods system. So it's the idea that we're going to loan money to build up European war-torn countries and cities, all right? The goal is to stabilize currencies and provide some predictability, all right? Overall, what Bretton Woods was going to do is it was going to establish a system of payments, all right, making the US dollar the currency of the world, okay? So everything would be based off of our currency, which during this time still was backed by gold. Once we remove ourselves from the gold standard in 1971, then Bretton Woods falls apart, and we kind of shift this whole financial system that was created with the IMF here in the 1970s. So until then, we're on the gold standard. The US dollar is the world currency, and that's how we're funding reconstruction for European cities. We've also turned into a military industrial complex. The idea is the military is gaining a lot of power. The complex of production of weapons and goods is growing. It's employing over 3.5 million Americans in some capacity. And Eisenhower warns that it might be getting a little too big. So then we can look at corporate power. This is the idea that in the 1950s and early 1960s, we consolidate economic power into corporations. So corporations are going to increase. We expand into foreign markets more. And we have what's called the organization men, the idea that these guys get a job in their white collar establishment working in the managerial section, and they're the organization men. They work for that company pretty much forever, and they're part of the corporate culture. All right, so with that, then we have some serious economic records that are going to be made. So our GDP is going to jump from 213 billion in 1945, almost doubling to 500 billion by 1960. We're going to have a rise in personal income with a low inflation, which means we have more money in our pockets and more spending power. By 1960, 62% of American families are going to actually own their homes. But you always have to remember that poverty does accompany economic booms. So anytime a group of people are doing really well economically, there's always going to be people left behind in that economic journey. Okay, so if you look at this GDP, all right, we're growing. It's getting bigger, which means we have more imports, exports, and production. Something that helped the middle class grow is going to be the GI Bill, where more than 50% of the college students are going to be veterans. Universities are going to grow. Universities are going to begin being established, some of them during this time period. And the earning power and consumer spending is going to increase, which does lead to trade unions coming back. The Red Scare's over, so we're kind of leaning towards trade unions as favorable again. They are going to ask for collective bargaining, okay? And this is going to be embraced by some, but not all. Unions are going to demand an increase in wages, all right? They want to be able to go spend the money in the consumer market as well. So having a collective bargaining is kind of how they're going to set employment terms and provide memberships with pensions. So the idea is the union negotiates on behalf of all members of the union. So, all right, and this is just a fun image of what the perfect 1950s family is looking like, right? We have the husband and wife with the daughter and son doing recreational fun. So middle class life is booming during this time period. Consumption for homes is going to increase. All right, we're going to buy appliances, we're going to buy automobiles, and eventually we're going to start becoming a 2-car to 3-car family during this time period. So, baby products are going to be everywhere, toys, and then teenagers are going to become a market. So, the 1920s created the division between the younger and the older populations and slang and things like that. And by the 1950s, the teenager is a viable consumer market. They have jobs, they have cars, they have spending power. So companies are going to start targeting to them. Televisions are going to be everywhere. Okay, 7,000 sets in 1947 in the homes. We have 7.3 million by 1950. I mean, that's huge. And by 1960, 87% of American homes have at least one TV. This is going to be your link between consumers and markets. All right. Advertising is going to become huge, and the middle class is going to be the subject matter of the popular TV shows. So Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver, these popular shows are going to show the middle class, blue collar, neighborhood, white picket fence, 2 kids kind of families. This is an example, right? This is your family room. So we now have family rooms, people sitting around, hanging out, an entertainment set with your radio, your record player, and your TV all right there for all members of the family to enjoy in one room. Okay, which also leads us to rock and roll, right? Remember, teenagers are a target. Music's going to get there. So this is where we're going to take the African American rhythm and blues, R&B style music, and we are going to make rock and roll. All right. Of course, the adults view this as rebellious, just like your parents probably view what you listen to as not actual music or signs of rebellion. So, jazz is also going to grow during this time period. It's going to be really popular. Miles Davis is going to basically create bebop, and this is going to be huge, expanding the reach of jazz music. And then we're also going to get people called beats or beatniks. This is a group of writers and poets, mostly in New York and San Francisco, that speak out against the materialism of middle class. 2 examples of this are Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. So the beatniks are really the forefathers of the hippie movement. They're going to kind of start that rebellion that the hippies are going to take over. Rock and roll is huge. Rock and roll is big, and teenagers lose their ever-loving minds for it. Okay. So that means if the pendulum is swinging one way in the country, we have to have a counterbalance to that. Billy Graham is going to be that counterbalance. So yearning for faith, all right, feeling anxious about the threats of nuclear war, all right, and those godless communists over in Russia, the Soviet Union, and China, church memberships are going to actually increase. Billy Graham is going to use the TV to his advantage. He spreads the evangelical Protestant message everywhere. He becomes kind of a touring evangelical rock star of sorts, where even the Queen of England wants to meet him when he comes through. He's just very popular. This is also going to be where we're going to get under God and in God we trust on things. So you need to remember and recognize that before 1950s, we did not have under God in our Pledge of Allegiance. It did not say that. And the Pledge of Allegiance was a little general, actually. We did not have in God we trust on any money. This all came from the Cold War. This all came from the threat of communism and the fact that they weren't seen as being religious. They were godless. So we're going to put that everywhere. This is an image of Billy Graham. All right. So remember, we have the baby boomers, right? So this is my parents coming from the baby boomer age. So post-war marriages, stable, several kids. Guys and ladies are getting married at 20, 21. Families are averaging 3.2 kids. And this boom really peaks in 1957 and remains there until the 1960s. We also have great inventions like penicillin. Thank goodness. The miracle drug, so dealing with a lot of different illnesses, you can take penicillin now. Education is super important, so more people are going to universities, men and women. And if we're having these big families, we need to figure out how in the world to kind of parent them, because maybe you don't want to parent like your parents did. So Dr. Benjamin Spock is going to come along. He's going to write some really big popular books, selling millions of copies. And his big advice was that child rearing uses common sense, and that you need to understand the children's needs and encourage parents to be more flexible and affectionate. So, hug your kids, get to know your kids, they're individual people. So, not, too bad of an idea there. As you notice, we're going to hit our peak, all right? And then by the 1980s, we're going to kind of plateau off with the amount of children we're going to have, okay? So the baby booming is going to hit, and by 1960, we start seeing it dip down. Women were expected to raise children and attend to the home. However, the reality of this was that to afford these houses and multiple cars, 3+ kids, etc., a lot of women did go outside of the home and find jobs and work. So 80% of women did stereotypical kind of women's work. By 1960, 97% of nurses are women. All right. By 1963, women's pay averages 60% of men's. I think currently we're up in the 90% range to men, so that's progress. And women are working to help families kind of keep that middle class status. Okay. So with that, right? Remember, we have rock and roll. We have the Billy Graham evangelical Protestant movement. We're actually also going to have kind of the sexual revolution starts here. All right, we're going to have this guy, Alfred Kinsey. He's going to do a bunch of research, and he's going to conclude that there is a scale to sexuality. So people flow in between kind of on the scale. This is going to be used as evidence, rather, for the different homophile movements that come along. So the Mattachine Society, which is a predominantly male gay man society fighting for rights. Then you have the Daughters of Bilitis. They're going to be for the lesbian population fighting for rights. So the beginning of the gay rights movement kind of starts here. It's going to reach its peak, obviously, in 1969 with Stonewall, all right, and continue on throughout the 70s. And Alfred Kinsey is going to kind of provide evidence that's used inside of that movement. All right, so media and morality. Obviously, we have some issues here, okay? Remember, there's going to be some backlash with all this, okay? So what is moral? What's going on? Lots of different things are happening. The Senate is going to have hearings on violence and sex and comic books. So comic books, like what you read today, had those levels of violence and sexuality in the 50s, but were shut down a lot of times. So we had hearings about that. We're also going to get that magazine, the Playboy magazine, founded in 1953, all right, which definitely was a counter morality magazine, but actually did have this thing called Real Reporting when it first started. So always fun to ask, who was the Playboy's first centerfold? It was indeed Marilyn Monroe. Okay, so all of these returning vets, they're getting educated, they're getting married, they're having families, they need to live somewhere. Okay, so now we're going to get our suburbia. All right, William Levitt is going to be one of the first ones. Okay, and he's going to apply kind of a mass production idea to building homes. So like today, when you drive through suburbia and you see a neighborhood being built, you see multiple houses going up at the same time. This all comes from Levitt. And the idea is mass produce these houses and sell them fast. So you have a bunch of guys come out and work on different things, kind of like an assembly line style, and then the houses are up, built, finished, people are moving in, all right, and the builders are moving on. So they typically were about 4-room houses, costing around $7,900, and this included kitchen appliances. Good luck finding that anymore. All right, federal housing administrations, veterans administrations, all these people are going to help with the mortgages to get them into their houses. All right. Something that's going to be a byproduct of all of this mass suburbia is something called white flight. The idea that there are African Americans moving into the middle class range They want to buy houses, so they go into these neighborhoods, they buy a house, and then the white families pack up their bags, sell their house, and leave. Okay. And this is really going to lead to a bunch of divisions between here is the black neighborhood, here is the white neighborhood, resulting in here is the black school, and here is the white school, which we'll be talking more about in chapter 27. Okay. A Supreme Court case that comes out of this is Shelley v. Kramer, 1948, South Carolina, outlawed restricted covenants. All right, but little change. So the idea was there were actual HOAs or covenants inside of neighborhoods that said no black family or minorities can buy homes. This case says, no, you can't actually do that, but nothing's actually going to change. Here are some images of the types of homes that you get, cookie cutter style. All right. We're also going to get the highways during this time period. So oil consumption is going to go up. We have more cars per household. And then the National Interstate and Defense Highways Act is going to be passed, and we're going to construct highways across the country. Okay. Bridges are going to be built at a certain height. It has to be a minimum of that so that we can move our military materials underneath these bridges when they are loaded onto trucks. What comes with cars traveling on highways? Fast food and hotels. So Suburbia is now going to take vacations. They are going to go shop. They are going to go to fast food restaurants like McDonald's, and they're going to go on vacations. So here is a 1930s illustration of the highways that existed. So not much really going on. You get around Florida and you can go up and down the western coast. All right, until by 1970, this is what we have. All right, you guys can get everywhere now. All right, so then we have the rise of the Sunbelt. And what I want you to know about the Sunbelt states is that includes the states listed on this slide: Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Nevada, New Mexico, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas. These are large states growing fast because of the defense industry. Plants are being built there, highways are ending up there. All right, and by 1970, 10% of the nation's population is going to live in California. Towns are going to expand, everything's going to grow, military bases are going everywhere. Sunbelt suburbs, okay? They're being built because we have Marine and Navy bases going up in California. All right, this brings more developers and shops. All right, which means eventually we get something really fun like Disneyland being built on the West Coast. So, yay for Walt Disney. All right, this is going to lead to a crisis, though. Okay, so by 1950s, the nation's 12 largest cities are going to lose a large population of whites, and it's going to leave a bunch of minorities living there. This leads to urban poverty. Okay, so remember, everybody's fleeing. The white population now has the ability to go buy homes. They're moving out to the suburbs. They're leaving the minorities in the cities. The cities are then losing money, so therefore now their education and everything else that is based on property taxes are going to be losing money and funding. So let's look at immigrants. We are going to let in 415 refugees from Europe, okay, in 1948, post-World War II. We are finally going to repeal the Chinese Exclusion Act. I mean, that's only taken us almost 60 years. And then we're going to end the exclusion of Japanese, Korean, and Southeast Asian immigrants. We're actually going to kind of open up our borders a little bit more and welcome people in, which does result in Mexican populations growing in the Southwest. Puerto Ricans are going to begin migrating. Cuban refugees are going to begin coming into Miami. This kind of explains some of the population centers that we have still today. So a lot of stuff going on in the 1950s. Get it in your notes, update your big ideas, and until next time.